Hey everyone, welcome back to Microphonic Designs. Today I'm going to take you through how I like to set up a digital mixing console, the Yamaha TF series in particular, for a marching band for marching season. This is something that I do with every single one of my audio system installation clients, and sometimes I'll get asked to set these up for people that are remote or maybe too far away that I can't do a system setup for, but they still would like help making sure their mixer is set up well. So this process is the same whether it's a TF1, a TF3, or a TF5. Today I have a TF3 here in the office that we're going to do the demo on, but again, this process will be the same for any of the TF consoles, and a lot of the ideas and what we're going to be doing should also be applicable to other digital mixers as well, such as the PreSonus Studio Live series, the Allen & Heath SQ series, and so forth. Now, before we actually get started in the mixer, I want to note that it's really important to have a plan going into it so that you're not just coming up with stuff on the fly. So I've printed out what I call a job jacket, and it's basically got the diagram, some spreadsheets for a particular setup. This one was for Aubrey High School last year, which is my local high school just up the road. So you'll see they've got 3 marimbas, they had 3 vibraphones, and 2 synthesizers. So we've got a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 channels that we're going to be using. And I believe they had a couple soloists as well. So we'll be using almost 16 channels. This is what their diagram looked like. We also always print out the spec sheet, which outlines the input. So this is the input list, and this basically shows me, okay, what particular sound source, which microphone is going to be going to which mixer channel. And I also include info about the color code and stuff like that that isn't totally relevant to this particular video. And here's a cabling list that we do that tells us what all cables are going to go on which instrument. The main thing that we're concerned with for now, working in the mixer, is going to be the sound source column and the mixer channel column. And then I also always print out the mixer programming checklist, which, by the way, I'm going to figure out how to make this downloadable for you. So make sure to check the description of the video so you can download a copy of this. I'm going to be updating it. I took some additional notes in preparation for this video, but I will make this a PDF and I'll make it available to you to download for free so that you can also follow along in setting up your mixer for this upcoming marching season. And this is what we're going to follow for the video here. So to start with, if you are getting your mixer out from storage and it still has information from last year, as this one does here, so you'll see we have scenes in here, and if we look at the home setting or the home page, you'll see that we have lots of colors and labels and stuff in here. The first thing that I like to do is save a backup of the entire mixing console onto a USB drive, and then do a factory reset. That's usually step number 1 when I'm doing these things, and that allows us to figure out if we need to do a firmware update or anything like that. And so just making a backup of how you had your settings, just in case, is always a good thing to do. To back up the mixer in this first step, before we even start programming anything, I've got just a regular thumb drive. I'm going to pop it into the USB slot that's on the right-hand side of the screen. That's really important because the one over here is for music playback. This one is for storing and loading mixer file data or data. So when you plug it in, you'll notice right here it says access, and then it goes back to the admin. So from here, we can go into the cogwheel setup menu, and this first option on the top left is what we're looking for, save load. And you'll notice on this USB drive, I already have a number of backups on here from last year and the year before. And we're going to go ahead and hit the Save As button. And this allows us to name the file. So I'm going to label this as LEHS 2024. And this is going to be Little Elm back up. Shout out to Little Elm High School, by the way, for allowing me use of their equipment to make some of these videos. And then we hit OK. So what this is doing is it's saving a copy of all of the settings in the entire mixer to the thumb drive, so that if we need to recall those settings later, we can do so from the thumb drive. And with that, we can back out of the Save Load menu and simply unplug the USB drive. Boom. So we don't have to eject or anything like that. You can just pull it out. So from here, how do we do a factory reset? It's actually pretty easy. So to start, I'm going to turn the console off. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold the home button. I'm going to press down on it, so I'm holding it down. And then I'm going to power the console back on. So this takes a minute, but just be patient, and I'm going to keep this in real time. I don't want to do any edits or anything, so that you can really get a feel for how long this takes. I'm still holding the button down. Yamaha logo appears. It's going to do the little animation thing. And eventually it'll take us to the factory reset page. And as we're sort of waiting for this, I did my absolute best to make sure that there was as little flicker from the screen as possible. So I appreciate you bearing with the whole frame rate stuff. So here we go. So this is the menu that we're looking for, and the first option that pops up is exactly what we're looking for. There's different things that we can do with the console, but for now we're just concerned with initializing all memories. So yes, we're going to do that, and we're going to give it just a minute here to completely reset the entire console. And there we go. So it'll pop back to this screen when it's done, and we just hit the exit button. And when everything loads back in, you'll see it takes us back to the setup page here. So English, that's great. This is the overview screen. Now, if you've just purchased a Yamaha TF console, this initial setup screen is what's going to, pop up the first time you turn the console on. So you can skip this step if you're working with a brand new out-of-the-box TF console. So there we go. A blank slate. So let's get into this. Now that we have the console set up as a fresh blank slate, let's get into our checklist here. So the first thing that I always do for organization's sake is get the channel labels taken care of. So this is going to consist of the channel name, the channel color, which I think is important, as well as the channel icon, which in itself is not as important, but can still be nice to have in there. And so we're going to be going through and labeling each channel, channel 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, with the sound source that is assigned to that particular channel. So again, let's just go through this in real time. We're going to do this for all however many channels. To get to the label section in a TF console, we're going to hit this bottom part here, and you'll see this little circle icon pop up. We're going to tap that, and this is going to open up the channel view. And then this little square up here on the left, we can hit the edit button, and this will allow us to change the channel name, the icon, and the color, which is exactly what we want to start with. Let's get going on the name. You can hit the X button on the right-hand side of the name input here to clear it, and we'll tap that empty space to pull up the keyboard. And for marimbas, I'm going to label this as M1 space high, just like that. And then we're going to assign the color. I usually do marimbas as green, and then the icon here, keys, mallet, just like that. Now what you can do on the actual console itself, I'm going to adjust the camera a little bit, is you can press these select buttons to change the label for whichever particular channel you need to focus on. So right now, over here, sort of off screen, I've got channel 1 selected. But when we change and select channel 2, you'll notice that the information on the screen here also changes. All right, and that's what's going to allow us to label channel 2 for our purposes. All right, so you're going to clear the name, pull up the keyboard. This is M1 low, so I usually do my marimba mics in at like high, low, color that green. give it the mallet icon, and we're good to go. All right, so we've got M1 high, M1 low. Let's move on to M2, which is marimba 2, high, color green, icon is under keys and mallet. There we go. Channel 4, again, we're clearing the name. This is M2 low, color green, icon, keys, mallet. So you can see that this is kind of a repetitive thing, and the reason I chose Aubrey as a good example is because their front ensemble is a pretty mid-sized front ensemble. It's not huge, but it's not too small either, because I wanted to give plenty of example for us to take a look at. Okay, and if you accidentally X out of the screen like I just did, you can just select your next channel and go back into that menu. No big deal. The nice thing about the Yamaha stuff is that they've done a great job making this stuff real easy to navigate. All right, so this is channel 6, which is marimba 3 low. Now another thing I'll add is that all of this labeling stuff and all of the everything that we're doing in this video, I'm demonstrating on the built-in screen, but you could also do this with your tablet or with a desktop computer by connecting it to your console. So here we move on, channel 7, this is the first vibraphone. So I'll just label this as Vibe 1. I like to do vibraphones as the color purple. And again, the icon is mallet. And we'll go to the next channel. Vibe 2, color purple, icon, keys. Icon mallet, yep. And then channel 9 is vibraphone number 3. There we go. So you get the idea. We're just going down the line. I'm referencing my spreadsheet to make sure I'm staying accurate to what it needs to be. And that's why having all of that organization done ahead of time is really helpful. Now in this case, let me point something out here. I skipped a channel. So you'll see we've got Vibe 1, 2, and 3, channel 7, 8, and 9. I've skipped channel 10 to leave it open just in case. And on channel 11, we're going to do the synthesizer channels. Now for synths, it's one instrument. So unlike the marimba, marimbas have a high microphone and a low microphone, but we treat them as separate. So even though it's one instrument, they're two separate channels because we need to do different things in the EQ with the high and the low microphone. The synthesizers are not like that. We need both of these channels to be treated as one instrument because it's a left and a right, which is not the same as the marimbas. So with marimbas, again, we treat each microphone separately. With synthesizers, we want to pair them together. So how do we pair the channels together? So I'm going to go back to the home screen here. And before we start labeling the synth channels, again, I'm going to start on channel 11 for this. We need to link channel 11 and channel 12 together so that they're treated as a stereo pair. So what we can do to accomplish this is tap this top part up here. There's like a dark circle around a number that says -6. We're going to click on it to highlight it and then tap it again to open up what's called the input page here. And we're not worried about these buttons, but what we are worried about is the one that says stereo link up top here. So this is what allows us to link channels 11 and 12. We could also link channels 10 and 11, but I wanted to keep everything nice and even on the like the actual fader block here. So we're going to simply link this as 11 and 12. So now what we have, if I kind of move the camera over this way, so you'll see channels 11 and 12, these two faders now slide together, and when we select one, the other one is also like kind of also highlighted. It's demonstrating that both of these are linked together. And the same thing with the mute button. If we turn this off, they both turn off because these two channels are being treated as one instrument, which is really cool. It's really helpful for doing synthesizer setups. now what we can do is go back into our channel label page here, and you'll also notice that the pan down here, it says L63 and R63, it automatically panned channel 11 to the left, and it automatically panned channel 12 to the right, because we have a left and a right channel coming from synth 1, and then we're going to do the same steps for synth 2 here in just a minute. All right, so let's open back up our channel name. And so this is going to be S. Now you could label this a couple different ways. So for example, you could label this as S1 left. And then we're going to change the color to orange. I like to do orange for electronics. Again, we're going to select the keys category, and we could put keyboard for this. And so when I hit the next channel, so I have channel 11 selected now, when I hit channel 12, you'll notice that the icon and the color stayed the same, but the name did not change. So that's one of the things that the link channels also does, is they share color. So again, I'll show you here, both of these channels are now orange, but we still get to name them separately, which is very nice. So for channel 12, I'm going to label this as S1 right. And I think the reason I like to actually type these out is because S1 is pretty self-evident. Synth 1 left and then right. Just a little bit easier to see, I think. You could also label it in any way that makes sense to you, but this is how we're going to do these today. And so now let's go ahead and get synth 2 labeled up. Again, we're going to link these channels. We want 13 and 14 linked together, and you'll notice that these select buttons are indicating that they're now linked. And let's go into the label. This is going to be S2 left, and we'll do the color and icon real quick. There we go. And I'm going to select channel 14 and label this as S2 right. Boom. Okay, so we've got all of the front ensemble instruments labeled and ready to go. All we have left now are soloist 1 and soloist 2, and in the summertime, sometimes we don't know, like when I'm doing a system setup, I don't always know exactly what instrument these are going to be. If I do, then I would label it, you know, flute and trumpet, but if all I've been told is like, hey, we're just going to have, you know, we know for sure we're going to have 2 or 3 soloists, I'll just label them as soloists and call it a day, and then I'll, of course, empower the directors to change the label as they figure things out. So let's get our soloist channels figured out here. Go into the channel name. This will be solo 1, and we'll color this one yellow. And let's just say we have a flute solo for this one, and then channel 16, we'll label this as solo 2. Okay, yellow, and this time we'll pick the flute, or the trumpet. Yeah, there we go. Again, the icons don't totally matter, but I like to be thorough. Okay, so almost 20 minutes in, and we have taken care of the channel labels. Next up is the input settings. And so that is going to take us to a menu that we looked at on the synth channels. Let's go back to channel 1, and I'm going to click this input box up here at the top. Again, it's the thing with the circle around the number. And so this is where I'll go ahead and turn on phantom power. So most of the schools I work with are using the Audio-Technica AT2035 or maybe the AKG P220. Those are condenser microphones. So we're going to turn on phantom power, and we're going to adjust the gain. So this is a guess on my part. This is an approximation. Usually for the AT2035, starting them out at plus 12 or maybe plus 15 is pretty good. For this demonstration, I'm going to set our example front ensemble up at plus 12. And again, I'm just going to use the select button to go to channel 2. We're going to turn phantom power on and turn that gain up. Now the gain here, you can select it. You see how it has like a little glowing circle around it. That's what lets us know exactly what is selected on the screen. And whatever is selected, whatever has that focus, we can use this touch and turn knob to adjust, which is really nice. You could also drag with your finger here, which is what you would do on the iPad app or the computer. But let's kind of get through these. Again, I'm just going to go down the line. We're going to do plus 12 for all of the Audio-Technica microphones. And this is one of those settings that I encourage and want to empower you band directors out there to adjust as you get through Bandcamp and as you start to develop the sound for the season. My recommendation is to really dial this in so that it sounds great across the show. I want you to hold off on making scenes, which we'll get to in just a little bit, as long as you can, but really spend time dialing in the gains for your front ensemble so that it sounds like $1,000,000. The synthesizer channels, you'll see we have two gain adjustment things here. This is because we have channels 11 and 12 linked together. Now, with electronic instruments, usually we're going to be receiving what's called a line level signal into the mixer instead of a microphone level signal. So we do not need to use phantom power in this case because Aubrey has a MacBook, they use MainStage, and we have an audio interface that is feeding our system. So that's a line level signal. We don't have to worry about phantom power. In some cases though, if you have an older synthesizer or you're using a hardware synthesizer and you have to use a DI box, sometimes you'll run into a DI box that requires phantom power in order to work. Okay, so make sure you check your DI box if you're using one as to whether or not it requires phantom power. The OnStage DB2050, for example, does require phantom power. So I'm not going to say that electronics never require phantom because sometimes the DI box will, require that. And in our case here, though, because we are, going to be receiving a line level signal, which is already pretty hot, I'm going to leave this at 0, and I'm going to do the same for Synth 2, just like that. For the soloists, it's a little bit more difficult to determine. Let's say, for example, we have two sideline microphones, and they're both going to be the Audio-Technica mics. I would probably put the one for the flute at maybe plus 20. I'd probably put both of them at plus 20 to start with. It might be a little bit hot, it might be not quite enough. That's going to depend on a few different factors, but again, with this setting, this will at least get us sound when we plug in for the first time. All right, so that is the input settings checkbox. That's plus 40 the phantom power on or off, and we've approximated the gain setting. Now panning, this is something that I think a lot of people sleep on, but I think it's really important. So in our layout, this is where the diagram could come in handy if you're doing this at home or you don't have the front ensemble set up. So you'll notice the mixer is out front, and the audience and director viewpoint would be looking at the front ensemble from this side. It's exactly what our perspective is here with the diagram. So we have marimbas 1, 2, and 3 kind of on the left side of the ensemble, so that's side 1. And then we have the vibraphones over here on the right-hand side, which is side 2. So in our panning, what we're going to do is sweep back over to this page here where we can see our marimbas. This is where treating the marimbas as separate microphones, but one instrument, comes in really important. So again, marimba 1 is the furthest out to the left. Okay, so I'm going to tap the little triangle looking thing where it says C, and again, it's highlighted. Hopefully you can see that on there. And I'm going to use the touch and turn knob to adjust the pan over to the left. And I'm probably going to do, let's just say left 35 for this example. And for marimba 2, we're going to go left maybe 20, like this, okay? And then marimba 3 is closest to the 50, because again, we're just sort of going off of the example here. We're just going to say that the mixer is on the 50. And we're going to do this to the left by 5, so just a little bit to the left. Now we could say that marimba 3 is on the 50, so if this front ensemble were set up so that marimba 3 was on the 50, I would simply just leave it at center instead of left, but we're going to go with mixer on the 50. Vibe 1 is the closest to the 50, and I messed up the labels here, so we got vibe 1, 2, and 3 going out. So we're going to adjust this to right, +5, and then vibe 2, we're going to match marimba 2 here. So +20 to the right. And vibe 3, we're going to match marimba 1 because it's the furthest out. So we're going to do right +35. And the synth channels, we're going to keep as hard left and hard right because that's how they're designed. And let's say, for example, that the soloist channels, maybe they are over here on side 2. It's a side 2, you know, we got the stage over on side 2. So I would put this by like, you know, right 40. And we're going to say that the mics are close together so that they have about the same amount of pan. But this is really important because if we pan this to the wrong side of the field, well, then we're going to hear that soloist on the other side where they're not standing, and that's going to draw the audience's ear and the judge's ear over to that side. So the panning, really important to go over to that side. Okay, so that is panning. Let's move on to EQ settings. Really the only thing that we're going to do here is what's called a high pass filter, otherwise known as a low cut filter. So what this means is that we're removing low frequencies from the sound. And that's a really important thing to do to help remove frame noise and wind noise and other unwanted things. Now to get to the EQ, we need to tap this green line that's just underneath the input setting that we just worked on. This is the EQ page, and to activate the high pass filter, you'll see it's labeled right here, HPF. We're going to tap this little button, and from here you'll see that HPF is highlighted and it's kind of glowing. So again, we can use the touch and turn knob to adjust exactly where we want the low frequencies to be cut out, or where we want the what's called the cutoff frequency to start. Now this is important to think about in terms of frequencies, but Yamaha helps us kind of convert that to notes if that's what you need. You can tap at the bottom of the screen here to sort of pull up this piano looking thing, which can help you. So they've highlighted, I think, what is middle C, and that should give you an idea of about where we're cutting out. But I'll just give you my shortcuts. So for the marimba high microphone, I usually start it at 160, right there. And what we can do, so again, this is for the marimba 1 high microphone. We need to put the same setting on marimbas 2 and 3, their high microphones. But instead of simply selecting each of those channels, marimba 3 high, marimba 2 high, and then activating this and then moving it, there's a shortcut that I'll show you that we'll use for the other instruments as well. So with our marimba 1 high microphone selected, we can press this little 3-line thing here. This will bring up sort of an extra tool menu, and we can simply press the copy button. So we're going to copy these settings. You'll see EQ parameters copied. We're going to select channel 3, which is the marimba 2 high microphone channel. We're going to press this button again, and then we're going to hit paste. And then there it is, EQ parameters pasted. Let's do the same thing for the marimba 3 microphone. Paste, good to go. Let's go ahead and get our marimba 1 low microphone done. I like to put the low microphones at 112 hertz, again, as a really good starting place. This works very well for all of the groups I work with. We're going to copy this parameter. We're going to select channel 4, which is our marimba 2 low microphone. We're going to paste it, and then the marimba 3 low microphone channel, paste it. Let's go ahead and take care of the vibraphones now. For vibes, I like to start them off at 150 hertz. Again, I'm going to copy that EQ parameter, select vibe 2 and paste, and then select vibe 3 and paste. And then for the soloists, we're going to start them out at 150 hertz as well. So I could just paste the vibe setting on there. Again, the soloist EQ is going to be, they're going to be the ones that change the most throughout the season based on the player, the instrument, etc. But the keyboard microphones usually, especially if you're using the AT2035s, usually this does the job. So I won't go too much more into EQ, but this is how we get it set up as sort of the default setting. The next thing to take care of is going to be the reverb settings, which is a big deal for the soloists and sometimes the front ensemble. So what we need to do is go back to our home page here so that we know where we're starting. And on the right hand side of the screen, I'm going to press this button here. It says Effects 1, Edit. So this is going to pull up a page that allows us to adjust the individual settings of the reverb unit. And by default, it's set up as Reverb Hall, which is what we typically want for marching band. We could change what effect it is by pressing the little icon here on the top and selecting our different effect, but Reverb Hall is going to work just fine. I like to put the reverb time at 3.6. The initial delay is going to stay at 112. And we're actually going to put another high-pass filter on the reverb effect itself, which is going to help clear up that reverb sound. So over here on the left of the screen, you'll see we have the reverb channel pulled up. We're going to select the green line, which is our EQ, and you'll notice that there's no high-pass filter button right here, like we had on the regular microphone channels, but that's okay. We can actually press this little button over here, and you'll see this sort of angled line. That is our low-cut filter, or rather our high-pass filter. We can turn it on, and I'm going to set this at 112 like we did for the Marimba Low microphones. And the last thing that we really need to do for the reverb for now is make sure that it receives signal from at least the soloist channels here, channels 15 and 16. So while we're still on the reverb page here, we can even hit the Effect 1 Edit button again to take us back here. We're going to hit this little square that says Send From, okay? So this is going to allow us to send signal from a particular channel to the reverb effect unit that's built into the mixer. So I've scrolled over to channels 9 through 16, and I'm simply going to tap the little slider here for channel 15, which is our first soloist, and I'm going to bump this up. I would probably say to set this at like -12 for your soloist channels to start with. That might be a bit much. It might not be quite enough, depends on your taste, but -12 is definitely enough to hear it and to figure out, you know, if it's going to be enough reverb for the moment. So play with that as you will. The other setting that you might want to play with during rehearsal is going to be the reverb time. Again, 3.6 is sort of my default, but you could cut this back to a shorter decay time based on whatever moment, right? So like if your soloist is doing Flight of the Bumblebee, you probably don't need a super long reverb time. But again, to get you going, just put it at 3.6, put these at -12, and you'll be good to go. And by default, you'll see here this little circle, this level knob. This is the actual volume dial of the reverb itself. So if this dial is all the way down like this, you're not going to hear the reverb, even though the Effects 1 slot is receiving signal from a channel. So we want to make sure that this is turned up, and you can't really see it, but there's a little triangle arrow thing on the right hand side of the knob. That just means full volume. So basically this knob here is the same as a slider, okay? So that's what we have going on. And then just like with the channel strips down here at the bottom, you have a mute button. Right, so if this on button is not highlighted or it's not lighted up, then the reverb unit is muted and you will not hear it. So make sure that is turned on and you'll be good to go. Next up is the DCA setup, is what's called a digitally controlled amplifier. And essentially what that means is that whatever channels are assigned to a DCA, it's basically like a group volume control. Okay, so for example, we're going to have a DCA for marimbas, and with that one slider on the DCA, we can adjust the volume for all 6 marimbas. So how do we get to the DCAs? Well, we actually have to press the input 1 and input 2 buttons at the same time, which will take us to the group fader bank. So I'm going to press these at the same time. And there we go. You'll notice the screen changed, and you'll also have noticed that the faders, the sliders on the bottom of the console, adjusted as well. And so this is where we can go in and, again, we're going to handle the DCA labels, we're going to change the colors, and we're going to assign channels to each DCA. So let's get our organization set up first. Let's get our DCA set up with our labels. And it's the same as with the regular channels, where again, I'm tapping the bottom. You'll see that little circle pull up. I'm gonna tap that, and then we're gonna go into the channel name section here. So DCA1, this is gonna be marimbas. And this is again where color coding comes into play. Marimbas, color green, because we did all of marimbas green. And again, the icon is gonna be mallet. I'm now going to select DCA2, which is here. And you'll see that label, this now says marimbas and it's green, and this one here says DCA2, so we're gonna adjust that one next. All right, so this is gonna be the vibes, IBES, color purple, icon, mallet, there we go. And then DCA number 3 is going to be electronics, or electros for short. Color orange, icon is going to be keyboard. And that's really all we need for now. If you have a drum set, if you're fielding a drum set, you could set one up for your drum kit. And if you had a small ensemble with several microphones, you could do one for a small ensemble. But because we only have 2 soloists in this example, I'm only going to create DCAs for our marimba subsection, the vibraphone subsection, and the electronics, which is going to be Synth 1 and Synth 2. So let's go ahead and actually assign those channels to these DCAs, right? So again, that's basically group volume control, which can be very helpful. So to assign channels to a DCA, we're going to hit the home screen again while we're on the group fader bank. And we're simply going to tap the rectangle at the top where it says DCA assign. All right, so we'll double tap that to come in here. And this is giving us little icons for each of our channels. So for the marimbas, we're just gonna match the marimbas. So we're going to highlight channels 1 through 6. And so now all 6 of our marimba channels are assigned to DCA number 1. So for example, if I were to turn this slider all the way down, with those marimba channels assigned to it, we would not hear the marimba channels go through. So this is very helpful during live performances if you need to make adjustments to a particular subsection or the front ensemble as a whole. It really helps to be able to do that quickly with a single fader or 2 instead of a whole bunch of them all at once. Let's go ahead and do the vibraphone DCA. Again, I've just selected the Vibe DCA, which is DCA number 2. And we're going to select our vibraphone channels. And now I'm going to select DCA number 3, which is for our electronics. And we're going to select our 2 synths. And because we have those channels linked, you'll see that it selected its matched pair to go along with it. And there we go. Now, one thing that's really cool is that when we select a particular DCA after having assigned particular channels to it, is that over here on the left, you'll notice that it changes what channels are displayed. So for example, if you have a particular mix on the marimbas, for example, maybe you wanted to have that inside marimba a little bit louder, the middle marimba a little bit more quiet, and the outside marimba low, you can adjust that individual mix by selecting the DCA if you're on this particular fader bank. So if I select the vibraphone DCA, you'll notice that the faders change. And if you've had your mixer for a while, sometimes the sliders can get a little sticky, but that's not a big deal. There we go. So very helpful tools to know about. And if we change back to the input 1 layer, you'll now notice that those marimba channels reflect those changes. So there's a couple different spots that you can make changes to individual instruments, just as a quick side note. So DCAs, very helpful, very cool, very good to have set up. Next up on my list is the sub-send setup. So in a lot of times, or in a lot of situations, wherever possible, I like to have the main left-right output on the back of the console go to the full range loudspeakers. And I like to have additional outputs go strictly to the subwoofers. So we have control over how loud the mains are and how loud the subs are, independent of one another. And that's really important. So the first thing we need to do to get this set up is make sure that we have our Omni outputs set up the right way. So the Omni outputs are basically the output jacks on the back of the console, and we can change what is feeding those physical connectors. So in the setup menu, we're going to go to where it says Omni out, which is right here, and this row at the bottom represents the physical connectors, the outputs on the back of your console, right? So what we can do is take Omni output 13 and 14 and change these from monitor to sub. Just like this. So now what we have is the built-in sub channel. So the Yamaha TF consoles have a built-in sub channel, and we're sending that same sub channel to both outputs 13 and 14 on the back of the mixer. And you'll see here outputs 15 and 16 are already by default being fed from stereo output left and right, which the stereo outputs are linked to the main red fader on the right hand side of the console. So the red slider on the right hand side, that feeds stereo outputs, the main stereo outputs that are going by default to Omni outputs 15 and 16. So that's kind of a long-winded way of saying it, but that's what's going on. And this is how we change outputs 13 and 14 to receive signal from the sub channel. Now the next step to getting this set up properly is to make sure that the main fader and the sub fader, so our two output sliders, are not linked together, because by default, I'm gonna kind of wheel this around, I'll have to kind of back this up. If we hit the output layer button, you'll notice that we have a slider for sub right here. So you see that says sub. And if we move the red master fader, you'll notice that the subwoofer slider also moves. So the main output and sub are linked. That is not what we want. That defeats the purpose, right? So again, what we have to do is unlink the sub channel from the main output. How do we do that? We have to go into a menu that is labeled Bus Setup. And right here at the bottom, it says stereo/sub level link. We're going to unlink that. This is a really important step if you're going to do a separate feed for your subwoofer. So now what we have is the slider here for the subwoofer, main fader, they're no longer linked. This gives us independent control of the volume of our subwoofers and our main full range speakers, which is really helpful and really important when you're going to several different football stadiums throughout the season. So that's how we do that. Now the next question is going to be, well, okay, if we have separate outputs on the back of the board for subwoofers, what do we want to send to the subwoofers? Well, for me, it makes the most sense to simply send the electronics. So what we're going to do is go back over here to the input 1 layer, and we're going to select the Synth 1 channels. And if we scroll down here on the screen, you'll see this sort of series of little green dots, these lines here. We're going to tap this, and this is going to open up the Send to Auxiliary Bus page. And the sub send is kind of hidden. We have to scroll all the way over to here. So you'll see this is the yellow sub fader that we were talking about. So we can tap this, and I'm going to put this all the way up at 0. So that's going to apply for Synth 1 left and Synth 1 right. And we're going to do the same for Synth 2. We're just going to turn this all the way up to 0. So now what we have is signal from the two pairs of synthesizer channels going not only to the main output for your full range speakers, but also to the sub slider as well. And that also is going to help make sure that frame noise and wind noise does not go to your subwoofers, and that helps keep the signal nice and clean. So that is the sub send setup. Next thing we need to do is set up the output filters, which may not be completely necessary this day and age because a lot of modern loudspeakers have these types of filters built in, but I still like to do it in the mixer just to be thorough. So what we can do is over here on the main stereo output, I'm going to actually select that channel, the main output, and you'll see here we have the stereo pulled up, or the main stereo output rather. what we can do is actually click the EQ at the top of that channel strip, and this is the main EQ for everything going to our full range speakers. And what we're going to do is turn this into a high pass filter, ensuring that no low frequencies go to our top speakers. And where you set this may depend on the particular model of loudspeaker that you have. I'm going to set it at just 112 for this example to match our marimba low microphones, because that's the lowest thing we have going right now. And then what we can also do once we get this set in place, again for our main stereo output, is select our sub channel. So again, on our sub channel, I'm going to hit the select button. The EQ screen is already pulled up because that's what we had on the screen. And this, because it's a dedicated sub channel, has a low pass filter built into it, which is really nice. So we can click that button and we can set this at maybe 106, just below the crossover point for the main loudspeakers. The next bit that we need to do is adjust and create our custom layer, which can be particularly useful because what it allows us to do is choose what different channels we want to be visible on the top of the board, which can be really great for, again, live performances. So how do we get to the custom layer? Well, we're going to tap the input 2 and the output buttons at the same time. So you'll see it says custom, and you hit both of these at the same time. So let's tap those, and you'll notice that this looks really similar to our input 1 layer, but we can choose what different things appear. So for example, this channel 10 that we're not using, we could choose to get rid of that, and then we could list our DCAs over here on this side. So let's do that. And the custom layer is a little bit different for every group. It just kind of depends on what I think is going to work best for them. We can adjust the custom layer by going into our setup menu, and then they actually have a button for custom fader bank. So we're going to press this button. And again, the icons at the bottom that we can scroll, these represent the physical channels that we have down here. So we're going to keep the first 9 channels the same. I'm going to take channel 10 and just hit none. So I'm selecting channel 10, I scroll down and I'm going to hit none because I don't want anything to be there. We'll go ahead and keep our electronics and soloist channels the same just because they're nice and even right there. And then here where we have channel 17, 18, and 19, I'm going to change these to be our DCAs so that we have access to our DCAs right here on top with all of the rest of the channels. So we can do that by scrolling over, and where channel 17 currently is, we're going to select that, and I'm going to choose right here DCA 1, marimbas. Channel 18, I'm going to move this to the vibraphone DCA, and then number 19 here, I'm going to change to the electronics DCA. Channel 20, I'm going to hit none to get rid of that. And over here where it says delay, we never really use delay for marching band, so I'm going to put the subwoofer slider here. And we'll keep our stereo input channels, which is these over here, and I'll also keep the reverb slider there. So now what we have, by setting this up, is on our main top part of the board here, we've got all of our individual channels, we've got our 3 DCAs, we've got access to our 2 stereo input channels, we've got the reverb slider, and then we have the main outputs, the subwoofer outputs and the main left-right full range output all right next to each other. So that's how we can get the custom layer set up, really helpful, and is one of the last things that we do. There's still a bit more to do, but that's a really helpful thing to get done if you've never used the custom layer before. Next up is the user-defined keys and the user-defined knobs, which are these 4 knobs down here at the bottom, and these 6 buttons, A through F, up here to the right-hand side of the screen. Now, how you choose to use these buttons and these knobs is really up to you, but again, this is my preferred method and is what I recommend for most people, especially if you're not really getting into the nitty-gritty of what this console can do. I think a nice simple setup is the way to go. So how do we adjust what these buttons and knobs do. Well, let's start by kind of figuring out what exactly these are for in the first place. So these are called user-defined knobs. So again, what that allows us to do is we can define and we can choose what we want these knobs to do. So they could be used for a multitude of different things. The same thing goes for the keys up here, the buttons. So let's figure out where to go. So a lot of what we have to do is from this cogwheel, the setup menu, and then in this case, we have a whole dedicated button, user-defined controls, right there. And so we have three options. We've got keys, knobs, and foot switch, because yes, there's a foot switch input on the back of the board, which we'll get to in a second. For keys, I typically like to set things up like this here. So I use the F key to go forward. So when we're in the show, usually we use what are called scenes to change different settings of the board to best fit what's going on in a particular phrase of the marching show. So for the F key, I like to set this one to scene and then incline recall, which is what ink is going to do. So I'm going to hit OK. So now the F button is going to go forward a scene. And what that means is that, especially for UIL, we have to have a student run the soundboard. All they really have to do is hit the F button to go forward in the show, which is really helpful. C is going to be for decline recall, and I actually need to fix the F key right here. So for F, we're going to set this one to incline recall. So that's the C and the F buttons. The E button, I'm going to have this do nothing. I'm going to set it to no assign. And the B button, I'm also going to set that to no assign so that these buttons just don't do anything. The D button, I'm also going to set to no assign so that that button doesn't do anything. And the A key, I'm actually going to set to store so that when we make changes on the board, like to volumes and EQs, for example, we can simply hit the A button to store those changes to a new scene. So that's what we're going to do. So this is how I like to have the keys set up. The knobs, I just assign all of these to do nothing, because what I don't want is for a student to accidentally hit one of these knobs. And for example, if you have a channel selected, by default, the A knob here is going to adjust the input gain. So I don't want it to do that. So we're just going to hit no assign, and the same goes for the foot switch. Now the foot switch has certain implications, like if you have, for example, the rack mount TF console, the TF rack, you could totally have a TF rack in your synth cart for like indoor and have a synth player hit a foot switch to change scenes throughout the indoor show. So that's where this can be particularly useful. For marching band, a lot of times we're just using the user-defined keys over here for scene changes, so we don't really need the foot switch to do anything. And I don't want it to accidentally trigger anything, like if moisture gets in that input jack or something. So again, I'm just going to put everything other than the A, C, and F keys to no assign. And then we're good to go for user-defined keys. Okay, so as I was editing the video, I realized that there's a pretty important checklist item that I actually need to add to the checklist, which is configuring our recall safe settings. So recall safe affects what is going to be loaded in when we recall a scene. So as we get into the marching season and we start developing different scenes for the different segments of our marching shows, there are certain controls that we may not want to be affected by recalling or loading in a scene. So for example, if we are loading scenes throughout the show, we probably do not want the master volume fader here to be affected by scene recall. Same goes for the subwoofer send and probably the DCAs as well, and I'll sort of explain why as we get into it here. How do we make it so that these different channels here, our DCA channels, our sub channel, and our main master output channel, how do we make it so that these are not affected by scenes? In other words, how do we prevent them from being changed when we go between different scenes. What we can do is come into the setup menu, which is the cogwheel. We've seen that a lot in this video so far. And there's a button over here on the bottom right that says recall safe. So we can click this, and this is going to bring us into sort of a spreadsheet looking menu here. And we've got different categories, different banks of channels that we can work on throughout, the course of the console here. For all of the individual channels, we're not really going to focus on those because normally we do want these to be affected by scenes. Sometimes we'll choose certain parameters to be recall safed so that they're not affected by scene changes, but I might do a different video with more in-depth, insight into that. For now, the things that we're concerned about are, as I mentioned, the master outputs and the sub output and the DCAs that we have set up. So the master output and the subwoofer output, pretty self-evident. Those are our master volumes going to our mains and our subs. And so we do not want those being affected by scenes, because if we have to turn the main fader down and the sub fader down, we want it to stay in that position throughout the course of the show. So we wouldn't want those sliders to keep popping back up whenever we recall a scene. So all we have to do is keep the all column here checked, and we're just going to activate the recall safe. So when these little buttons are lighted up green like this, this means that the stereo output and the subwoofer outputs are safe from being affected by scenes. They will not be affected by scenes. So pretty easy to do. Same goes for the DCAs. We want to make sure that the name and the fader and the mutes are safed from being affected by scenes. So we'll just activate the recall safe feature. And now our DCAs here, which as we covered, are basically group volume controls for our marimbas, our vibraphones, and electronics, our synthesizers. These are no longer going to be affected by scenes, and that's really helpful because if you're in the middle of a live performance and you need to adjust the volume for a particular subsection, you probably don't want that adjustment to be affected by scenes. You just want to be able to turn the marimbas down for the whole show, and there you go. And you can always choose to turn it back up manually if you need to. So that is the recall safe setting. Again, you can get really detailed with what you do with this, but we'll leave it at that for now. This is a really good basic way to have it set up to get your season started. And if you have questions about this particular function, let me know. And like I said, I could probably dig into it in a different video. Now, a couple of extra things that I sort of figured out and found out about in preparation for this video we're going to go over, just to be extra thorough to give you all the info here. So one of the things that we can do is actually go into the setup menu and then go into preference, and we can change the touch sensing area optimization from sitting to standing, because most of the time we're standing over top of these things. And I don't really think this is going to make much of a difference, but again, it can be helpful just to be thorough. You can also turn the blinking tap key on or off. So on the console, there's this this thing here. This is used to set the tempo for time-based effects such as delay and echo, and we pretty much never use those for marching band. So if you don't want this thing blinking all the time, you can come into this screen and simply turn it off. And so you'll see now that tap key is no longer blinking. So again, a small thing, if that bothers you, you can turn that off. Display delay scale, I just turn that to feet. You probably won't have to use this, but still turn it to feet. And then you can adjust the frame rate and a couple of different other things, but those are the main parameters that I'll highlight here. We can also go over here to the time option, and they've got a whole bunch of different things. Go ahead and select Central Time. You can change what format you want the date, and you can actually change the date itself, which today, the day of filming, is April 29th, 2025, and at this exact moment it is 2:37 p.m. We'll hit OK, and we can also adjust the brightness, which can be really helpful. So the brightness menu here, for outdoors, I would say just turn these all the way up, which I probably should have done from the very beginning of the video, but that'll be all right. And then they also have a power saving mode that by default is set to never. But if you want to have that power saving mode, you can hit 30 seconds. And so basically what that's going to do is, you know, after the chosen amount of time, it will dim the screen and it will dim all of the lights on the board here to help save power. And that might help increase the longevity of the touchscreen. You know, I don't really know, but this could be a helpful thing that you activate just in case. All right, so let's see, the last 2 steps on my checklist here. Let's go ahead and save all of these settings to a scene. So we've done a lot of labeling, and we've done DCAs, and we've done color coding, and we've adjusted input gain settings and a whole bunch of stuff. So let's make sure that those settings are in an easy to access place. So we're going to save all of this information into what's called a scene. And a scene is basically a save state. It takes a picture of where all the settings are and it freezes them in place so that you can go back to them at any time. To access the scene menu, you simply tap the scene name here in the top left of the screen. So we're going to tap this. It's going to open up the scene menu. And we have 2 banks, a scene A and a scene B, of 99 save slots each. So you'll see we have a scene A all the way up to A99, and then a scene B that goes all the way to B99. Scene A has some factory pre-built stuff in here from Yamaha. I tend to just use scene B because it's blank, and I'll save the template scene here in slot B01. So again, I've just selected the slot by tapping like this, and I'm going to hit the store button. And usually what I'll do is label this as, you know, 2025 template. And I leave a note. I like to remind people, start here, period. Okay, so now we have our scene saved to slot B01. And this is what I recommend. You spend a couple weeks really dialing down. Really spend the time setting your input gain settings and getting your EQ settings in there and dialed in as best you can over the course of Bandcamp and over maybe the first week or 2 of the season. And then once your template scene is just rock solid and sounds good most of the time, you can start to refine it for your marching show by putting in different phrases of the show and adjusting the settings to where it sounds best for that part of the show. So, you know, you might have a pre-show scene, and then you might have a part 1 top to A, part 1 top to B. You know, you might have a scene for the ballad and then one for the closer, maybe a scene for the drum break based, you know, whatever you have going on based on your show. You can use scenes as a very powerful tool to help ensure that the sound system is behaving the way that you want for each part of the show. And if you're going insane and you have like 60 scenes, that's probably too much. But, you know, up to maybe 10 or 12 scenes per show, that's pretty standard. Getting up to like 20 scenes, you know, like that would be kind of a lot. One thing that I'll note about scenes is that you can reorder them by tapping the name of the column. So if we tap the title, like the title column here, it will rearrange them based on the title. So you'll see now we have to scroll all the way down to the bottom to find our other scenes because the other ones are blank, right? We can also sort them by date, up or down. So pretty handy. So this is really useful if you anticipate the need of inserting scenes. I recommend figuring out a naming scheme for your scenes so that you can rearrange them by the title if you need to do so. But yes, you can rearrange scenes. And then the very last step sort of brings us back full circle. We're going to save this whole template setup on a thumb drive. So we're going to insert our thumb drive from earlier. We'll see the access thing pull up, showing us that it is connected to the USB drive. And we're going to do what we did earlier. We're going to go into the setup menu. We're going to go to save load, and we're going to save as, and we're going to say, you know, Aubrey High School, Aubrey HS 2025. And this is the template. Okay, and so now I have a copy of their console, and if the directors have a question about how I set up their mixer, I can now load the .tf file onto my computer, open it up with the TF Edit software, the application, and I can walk them through it remotely, which is really freaking cool. So that is the complete walkthrough of how I set up a mixer. It took a little bit longer. This is definitely a longer video than I thought it was going to be, but I really wanted to be thorough. I wanted to give all of you the complete walkthrough tour of how we do things here at Microphonic Designs. And if you have questions, please leave them down in the comments. Feel free to reach out. And of course, if you would like to purchase a mixer like this, get in touch as well. I do have access to the Yamaha TF series. I think they're a great mixer for how accessible they are. Oh, and there's that screen dimming we talked about. Another great series of mixer is the Allen & Heath SQ series, a little bit more expensive, but it's got a lot of really great functionality with also a very accessible user interface. The most important thing that I want to make sure of is that all of your stuff is organized and that you feel comfortable getting to the different things that you need to in the mixer. So again, I hope this has helped you in some way. You know, I of course am a big advocate for making sure you set it up the way that's comfortable, but this is how I do it. A lot of my clients have had a lot of success and a real easy time figuring out what's going on with this type of setup. So yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.